It was an early morning in the heart of the city, and the streets were just starting to come alive. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Tourists from all over the world had begun to gather, excited to see one of the most famous landmarks in the city, an ancient palace that had stood for centuries, housing royalty and history in its grand halls. Among the crowd, a young tourist named Emily was exploring the city for the first time. She had always dreamed of visiting this place, and today, her dream had finally come true. She had heard so much about the palace and its traditions, but there was one thing that she hadn't quite prepared for: the royal guards. Emily had read about them online, of course, but she never truly understood how impressive they were until she saw one standing in front of the palace gates. Tall, proud, and in full uniform, the guard stood completely still. His eyes focused on something far beyond the crowd. His posture was perfect, as if he had been carved from stone. His uniform was pristine, the red and gold contrasting sharply with the dark gray of the palace behind him. It was an image of strength, discipline, and history, something you couldn't fully appreciate from a screen or a book. But it wasn't just the guard that caught Emily's attention. It was the horse. The royal guard's horse stood beside him, equally as majestic, with its shiny black coat and powerful muscles. The horse was massive, its eyes wide and alert. It seemed to be a part of the guard, as if they had shared countless years together, developing an unspoken bond. The way the horse stood there, perfectly still, with the guard beside it, created a sense of calm and power that Emily found fascinating. She had always loved horses, but seeing one of this size and beauty in such a setting felt like something out of a fairy tale. Emily, always the curious traveler, knew that this was an opportunity she couldn't miss. She was an amateur photographer, and she had brought her camera with her to capture the essence of the city's beauty. The idea of taking a picture of the royal guard and his horse was something she had imagined doing for years. It would be the perfect shot, something she could show her friends when she returned home. It was a moment she wanted to freeze in time. As she slowly approached, Emily felt a surge of excitement. The crowd was milling around. Some people were taking pictures from a distance, while others were admiring the history of the place. No one was paying much attention to her at first. She moved closer, getting a better angle for the shot. The horse's shiny black coat gleamed in the sunlight, and the guard remained as still as ever. The only sound was the soft rustle of the crowd and the distant hum of the city. She was almost close enough to reach out and touch the horse. Emily knew that it was a bit daring, but in her mind, it felt like a harmless act. After all, the guard wasn't moving, and the horse seemed calm. She had no idea how strict the rules were or how dangerous such a move could be. Her mind was focused on the perfect picture, the one that would capture the moment in a way that would impress her friends back home. She raised her camera, steadying her hands as she prepared to take the first shot. But then, something caught her eye. The horse's ears twitched, just slightly. It was so subtle that Emily almost didn't notice it. She frowned for a moment but shrugged it off. Maybe the horse was just adjusting to the noise of the crowd. After all, it had to be used to the busy surroundings. Emily was so caught up in the excitement of her shot that she didn't think much of it. She stepped a little closer, now only a few feet away from the horse, to get a better angle. She could feel her heart racing, the thrill of the moment building. Her fingers hovered over the camera button. The horse was so beautiful, so strong, that it almost felt like a dream. She wanted to be part of that dream, to feel the connection between the guard, the horse, and the rich history that surrounded them. Emily took a deep breath and pressed the shutter button. The camera clicked, capturing the moment. But just as she thought everything was perfect, something unexpected happened. The horse's head jerked slightly to the side, and its muscles tensed. It was an unmistakable sign that it was becoming uncomfortable with Emily's proximity. But Emily, still not fully understanding the gravity of the situation, took another step closer. She thought to herself. It's just a horse. It's not like it's going to bite or kick me. What she didn't realize was that the horse was not just any horse. It was trained to respond in a very specific way to threats, to people who got too close to its space. And now, Emily was dangerously close to crossing that line. But her focus remained on getting that perfect picture. She had already committed to the idea in her mind. The more she focused on the image she was about to capture, the less she paid attention to the subtle signals the horse was giving off. Around her, the crowd had begun to murmur. Some tourists had noticed her getting closer to the horse and were starting to point it out to their friends. A few looked uneasy, as if they could sense something was wrong. But Emily was still in her own little world. She had already taken several photos, and with her camera in hand, she took a small step forward, leaning just a little closer to the horse's side. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Emily didn't realize how much danger she was in. Her excitement about the perfect shot blinded her to the fact that the horse, a trained animal with its own set of rules and instincts, could react very differently from what she expected. It wasn't just a simple animal. This horse was part of a centuries-old tradition, one that had been trained to guard and protect. And it wasn't in the mood for a curious tourist to invade its space. The guard, still standing tall and silent beside his horse, had noticed the shift in the horse's behavior. He didn't react at first. He couldn't. It was against protocol to make any sudden movements, and as much as he wanted to warn Emily, he was trained not to speak or engage with the public unless absolutely necessary. But he had seen this happen before, and he knew exactly what was coming. Emily, meanwhile, was completely unaware of the tension building between her and the horse. She just wanted that one perfect picture, unaware that the horse's tolerance was wearing thin. As Emily stood there, inches away from the royal guard's horse, she could feel her pulse quicken. The excitement of the moment, combined with the sheer beauty of the scene in front of her, made her forget the world around her. She was so focused on getting the perfect shot that she didn't notice the subtle changes in the horse's behavior. The horse's ears, which had previously been relaxed, now twitched nervously. It wasn't just a casual flick of the ears, it was a sign that the horse was becoming increasingly aware of its surroundings. The horse's head turned slightly, its dark eyes narrowing, scanning the crowd. It wasn't looking at Emily with the same calm composure as before. Instead, it seemed to be sizing her up, sensing that something wasn't quite right. Emily's fingers tightened around her camera, oblivious to the tension building around her. She took another step closer, trying to get the perfect shot. Her heart was racing, and she felt like she was about to capture something truly special. The combination of the horse's glossy coat, the guard's stoic posture, and the grand palace in the background was picture-perfect in her eyes. But the guard, standing still and silent as ever, was watching her closely. He had noticed the small shift in the horse's behavior and knew that trouble was brewing. His job, after all, wasn't just to stand and look impressive. It was to ensure that the horse, the palace, and the people around him were safe. The horse wasn't just a majestic animal standing still for decoration. It was a trained sentinel, and it had a very specific set of rules when it came to its personal space. The guard had been in this position countless times before. He had seen tourists approach the horse too closely, had heard the excited chatter of those who were unaware of the danger they might be causing. He knew that the horse, despite its calm and composed demeanor, had its limits. And Emily, without realizing it, was getting dangerously close to crossing them. From the corner of his eye, the guard noticed that the crowd had started to notice Emily's behavior. A few tourists were pointing, whispering, and even laughing nervously. But none of them seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The guard's job was to protect the horse and the royal tradition it represented. But he couldn't interact with the public unless necessary. He wasn't supposed to speak unless there was an immediate threat. He had learned to control his emotions, to stay still, to be a silent protector. And now, he was silently warning Emily. The horse, sensing the approaching danger, shifted slightly, its muscles rippling under its coat. This time, it wasn't a casual movement. It was a deliberate adjustment. The animal's body seemed to tense up, its powerful frame ready to react. The horse wasn't just a passive figure standing by the guard. It was an active participant in the delicate dance between tradition and security. The guard was fully aware that the next few moments would decide whether the situation would remain calm or escalate into something more intense. Emily didn't notice. She was too absorbed in her excitement. She was so close now that she could almost feel the horse's breath, warm and steady. The idea of touching the horse or petting its mane flashed through her mind, but something deep inside her urged her to hold back. She had been raised to understand that animals, especially those that were trained for specific purposes, could be unpredictable. Still, the thought of the majestic horse was too tempting to resist. The guard, seeing Emily getting even closer, took a deep breath. His expression remained stoic, but there was a slight tightening around his jaw. The moment was coming, he could feel it. He had been trained for situations like this, trained to stay calm even when the tension around him was rising. He knew how to protect the horse without reacting aggressively. But he also knew that if Emily didn't stop now, things could escalate. Without making a sound, the guard subtly shifted his posture, standing just a little straighter. It wasn't a big movement, but it was enough to send a message. The horse, sensing the slight change in its handler's posture, responded instinctively. Its muscles tightened even more, its ears flat against its head. This wasn't a signal of friendliness, it was a warning. The guard and the horse were in perfect sync, their unspoken communication powerful and precise. Emily, still not understanding the danger she was in, moved even closer, her eyes fixed on the camera screen. She adjusted her position to get the perfect angle. So focused on the image in front of her that she had forgotten the basic rules of respect for animals and their space. She had no idea that she was dangerously close to crossing the line. The horse's body was now almost completely rigid, its eyes locked onto her, and yet Emily was so immersed in her task that she failed to see the signs. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a few people in the crowd, glancing at her with concerned expressions. But she brushed it off. They were probably just jealous of her great shot. She smiled to herself, taking another photo of the horse, oblivious to the fact that things were about to take a turn. The guard, still unmoving, shifted his gaze from Emily to the horse. He didn't need to say anything. He had done everything he could to warn her. His stillness was the only message he could give. But he knew that the situation had gone far enough. The horse was becoming agitated, and it wasn't going to wait much longer. In the distance, a small group of onlookers began to murmur more loudly. One of them, an older woman, leaned over to her companion and whispered, "She's getting too close. Doesn't she know better?" The comment was meant to be quiet, but it was just loud enough for the guard to hear. He didn't react. His training didn't allow for any unnecessary movements or words. But inside, he was preparing for what would come next. At that moment, a slight breeze stirred the air, and for just an instant, everything seemed to slow down. The bustling city around them faded into the background, and it was as though Emily, the guard, and the horse were the only ones in the world. The horse's nostrils flared, and its muscles quivered. It was a moment of raw tension, where any small movement could set things in motion. The crowd, now fully aware of the situation, began to fall silent. The once lively chatter had stopped, replaced by a sense of anticipation. They all seemed to understand, without saying a word, that something was about to happen. But none of them could have predicted exactly how quickly things would unfold. Emily took another step forward, her camera raised high, but just as she was about to snap another picture, the horse shifted its weight, its head jerking toward her with alarming speed. Its powerful hooves struck the ground with a loud thud. The crowd gasped, and Emily froze in place, feeling the intensity of the moment. She finally realized that something wasn't right, but it was too late to turn back now. The crowd around Emily had gone silent. It was as though the world had stopped moving for just a moment. The air, which had once been filled with the sounds of tourists laughing and chatting, was now thick with tension. Emily, still frozen in place, stared in shock at the horse's sudden movement. Her heart raced as she felt a rush of panic flood her chest. The horse's muscles were tensed, its dark eyes locked onto her, and it wasn't backing down. The guard, standing motionless beside the horse, had seen the warning signs long before this moment. He knew that the horse's response was no accident. It was the horse's instinct to protect itself and its handler when it felt threatened. But what happened next was something that neither Emily nor the onlookers had expected. The horse, with a powerful movement that seemed to come out of nowhere, suddenly reared up. It was a graceful yet forceful motion, its hooves kicking the air as it lifted its front legs off the ground. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath filling the air as the horse's sudden movement startled everyone. It wasn't just a simple shift, it was a full-on reaction, and it made Emily's heart skip a beat. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Emily stood there, her eyes wide with fear, watching in disbelief as the horse's hooves hovered above the ground, its body perfectly poised, ready to strike if needed. The guard, who had been calmly observing Emily's every move, immediately snapped into action. With a swift, controlled motion, he stepped forward, his hand reaching out to steady the horse, gently guiding it back down to the ground. The horse, though clearly agitated, responded to the guard's touch. Slowly, its powerful legs lowered back to the ground, and the tension in its body began to ease. But it still seemed on edge. Its ears flicked back and forth, alert, scanning the crowd. The horse wasn't just reacting to the presence of a stranger, it was instinctively protecting itself from what it considered a potential threat. Emily's stomach dropped. She felt a sudden chill run through her body, realizing how close she had come to making a huge mistake. She had heard of animals becoming agitated when they felt threatened, but she had never imagined it would happen so quickly or so dramatically. The horse's rearing had taken everyone by surprise, including her. Her camera, which had been in her hands just moments before, now felt heavy and pointless. She lowered it slowly, her fingers trembling. The excitement she had felt just minutes ago seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by a deep sense of regret. She had wanted a perfect shot, but now, she was afraid. She didn't understand what had gone wrong, but she knew that something had shifted in the air. The mood had changed, and she was no longer a curious tourist seeking a perfect photograph. She was a person who had pushed too far, too close to an animal that wasn't accustomed to being touched by strangers. The crowd, which had once been watching in awe, was now on edge. Some people took a step back, murmuring nervously to one another. Others were too stunned to speak, their eyes fixed on the horse, still standing tall beside the guard. The air was thick with uncertainty, and it seemed as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something else to happen. The guard, after steadying the horse, turned his attention back to Emily. He didn't speak, but his eyes locked onto hers, with an intensity that made her feel like she was being scolded without a single word. His gaze wasn't angry, it was calm, but firm. It was the kind of look that made it clear that she had crossed a line. His silence spoke volumes. It was as if he was telling her, without uttering a word, that she had come dangerously close to causing a serious situation. Emily's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She had been so focused on the perfect picture, so caught up in the excitement of the moment, that she had ignored every warning sign the horse had given her. Now, standing there in front of the guard and the horse, she felt small and foolish. It wasn't just about the picture anymore, it was about respect. Respect for the animal, respect for the tradition, and respect for the boundaries that had been set long before she had arrived. The guard didn't move, standing tall and still beside the horse, his posture as perfect as it had been when she first saw him. His silence was overwhelming, and it felt like the weight of his presence was pushing down on Emily. She couldn't bring herself to look him in the eye. She felt as though she had done something wrong. And now, there was no way to undo it. The horse, having regained its composure, was still wary. It shifted its weight, its eyes scanning the crowd, and then returning to Emily. Its earlier reaction, though now under control, had left an impression on everyone watching. No one dared to move too close to the horse now. Everyone was careful not to make a sudden motion, aware that the animal could react at any moment if it felt threatened again. Emily took a step back, her body moving almost involuntarily. She didn't know what else to do. She was in a place where the rules were clear, but she hadn't understood them until now. She had crossed a boundary, and she could feel the weight of that mistake in the air around her. The horse, once majestic and calm, had become a symbol of the consequences of pushing too far. As she moved away, the guard didn't follow her with his eyes. He remained focused on the horse, his attention never wavering. His job was to ensure the safety of the animal and the visitors. And despite what had just happened, he was still in control. The horse, though now more relaxed, was still on edge, and the guard knew that it would take time for the animal to fully calm down. But he also knew that the situation could have been much worse. It wasn't just about a tourist approaching a horse, it was about understanding the rules of engagement, respecting the boundaries of others, and knowing when to step back before it was too late. Emily, now several feet away from the guard and the horse, looked around. The crowd had started to disperse a little, and the tension in the air was slowly lifting. She could feel the eyes of the onlookers on her, some of them offering sympathetic glances, while others seemed to judge her for her recklessness. She felt a deep sense of shame, realizing that her moment of excitement had almost caused something dangerous to happen. Her fingers still trembled as she placed her camera back into her bag, the thrill of capturing the perfect shot now gone. She looked at the royal guard one last time, his expression still unreadable, and she knew she would never forget this experience. It was a lesson learned in the hardest way possible. Some moments, no matter how tempting they may seem, are better left untouched. The crowd around Emily seemed to shift and scatter, their murmurs growing louder, as if the moment of tension had been broken, yet left lingering in the air. Emily took another step backward, her body feeling as though it were moving on its own. Her legs were shaky, and her heart still pounded in her chest. She had never felt so exposed, so acutely aware of her own mistakes. The royal guard stood tall, unmoving, his gaze fixed forward, but there was no mistaking the tension in his presence. His silence was almost as powerful as the rearing horse's reaction. It was a message, a clear, wordless warning. As she moved further away, Emily glanced at the faces around her. A few tourists had gathered closer, some whispering among themselves, their voices a mix of curiosity and caution. Others were looking at her, their expressions filled with that quiet kind of judgment that always seems to follow a mistake. Emily could feel their eyes on her, but she couldn't bring herself to make eye contact with anyone. She was consumed by embarrassment and regret. She had never intended to cause any trouble. All she had wanted was to take a beautiful picture of a guard and his horse. But now, the consequences of her actions were starting to sink in. The horse, still standing beside the guard, seemed to calm down slightly, though its posture remained rigid. Its muscles, once tense with agitation, were beginning to relax. But the horse's eyes, those dark, watchful eyes, kept scanning the crowd, still alert, still wary. It wasn't just the movement of the tourists that had set it off. It had been Emily's intrusion into its personal space, something that no one, not even the most experienced handlers, would take lightly. Emily had been so caught up in the moment that she had forgotten what she had read about royal guards and their horses. She had read that these horses were highly trained, with years of experience standing still for long periods, while the guard remained just as still beside them. She had read that the horses were an essential part of the royal tradition, part of a legacy that required respect, patience, and understanding. But none of that had seemed real to her when she was standing there, camera in hand, eager to capture the scene before her. She had overlooked all the rules, all the signs. And now, she was paying the price for her lack of awareness. The guard, despite his stoic expression, seemed to exude an aura of calm authority. Emily could tell that he was trained to handle situations like this, to maintain control, no matter what happened. The way he stood there, unmoving, but clearly in tune with his horse, suggested that he had seen it all before. He had probably dealt with tourists who had crossed the line, unaware of the dangers they were creating. He had probably dealt with the aftermath of such close calls many times before. But this time, Emily had been the one who had pushed too far. She glanced up at him again, trying to make sense of his expression. His face remained unreadable, but she noticed a slight shift in his posture. It was subtle, but there was a hint of something, perhaps patience, perhaps disappointment. Emily didn't know if it was directed at her, or if it was just a part of his professional demeanor. But whatever it was, it made her feel even more guilty for her careless actions. The crowd around her seemed to be recovering from the shock, but Emily still felt the weight of her mistake. She wanted to apologize, to somehow explain that she hadn't meant any harm, but the words stuck in her throat. What could she say? She had approached the horse without thinking, crossed a line without realizing it. What could she say to undo what had already happened? The guard's gaze finally shifted, and for a brief moment, his eyes met hers. There was no anger in his expression, just an unmistakable calmness, almost as if he were waiting for Emily to recognize her own mistake. He didn't speak, but his eyes seemed to say everything she needed to know. This wasn't just a simple interaction between a tourist and a royal guard. This was a matter of respect, tradition, and safety. And she had tested those limits. The horse, still standing with its legs slightly apart, seemed to be regaining its composure. Its head lowered slightly, though its ears remained alert. Emily knew that the horse wasn't fully calm. It was still processing what had happened, still on edge after the sudden movement. She could see it in the way the horse shifted its weight and in the way its eyes scanned the crowd. The horse was waiting, watching, ready to respond to anything that felt like another threat. Emily took another step back, still trying to distance herself from the situation. But it wasn't just the physical space that mattered, it was the emotional distance, the understanding of how close she had come to something far worse. She realized, as she stepped further away, that she had been lucky. The situation could have escalated much faster. A horse like that wasn't just powerful, it was dangerous when it felt cornered or threatened. The last thing Emily wanted was for the horse to lash out, or for the guard to be put in a difficult position of having to intervene more forcefully. A soft voice broke her thoughts. A woman standing nearby, who had been watching the scene unfold, leaned toward Emily. "You really shouldn't get so close to the horse," the woman said quietly, her voice almost apologetic. "It's not just for the guard's sake, but for the horse's safety too. They're trained to protect themselves, but sometimes, even the best-trained horses can get startled." Emily nodded silently, unable to speak. She felt a rush of gratitude for the woman's kindness, but it only made her feel worse for what had happened. The crowd, having sensed that the danger had passed, began to settle down again. People resumed taking photos, but they did so from a much greater distance. The atmosphere around the royal guard and his horse had shifted. There was a newfound respect in the air, a reminder that these horses weren't just statues to be admired from afar. They were living animals with their own instincts and limits, and they deserved to be treated with the utmost care and respect. As Emily stood there, watching the horse and the guard, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been lucky. She had been so close to a situation where things could have gone terribly wrong, and she wasn't sure if she could ever undo what had just happened. The feeling of embarrassment still lingered, but it was slowly replaced by something else: humility. She realized that in her pursuit of the perfect photograph, she had almost ignored the basic rules of respect and safety. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but one she knew she would never forget. The guard remained unmoving, his eyes now scanning the crowd once more. His posture was still perfect, and the horse beside him had finally settled down, though it remained alert. Everything around Emily seemed to return to normal, but she knew that for her, this moment would remain etched in her mind for a long time. She would never again approach an animal or any situation without fully understanding the boundaries, without respecting the unspoken rules that governed them. With one final glance at the royal guard and his horse, Emily turned and slowly walked away, her steps heavy with the weight of her mistake. The crowd seemed to move on, as if nothing had happened. But for Emily, nothing would ever feel the same again. As Emily slowly made her way through the crowd, her footsteps felt heavier with every step. She could still hear the distant murmurs of the people around her, but they felt far away now, as if they belonged to someone else's world. She was lost in her own thoughts, replaying everything that had just happened. The image of the royal guard's horse rearing up in front of her, its hooves kicking the air, was burned into her mind. She could still feel the rush of adrenaline that had hit her when she realized how close she had come to causing something dangerous. Her heart still hadn't fully calmed down, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had narrowly avoided disaster. It wasn't just the shock of the moment, but the overwhelming realization that she had put herself in a situation that could have easily gone wrong. What if the horse had reacted more aggressively? What if it had caused harm to someone in the crowd or, worse, to the guard? The thought made Emily's stomach turn. She had been so careless, so focused on getting a perfect shot, that she hadn't considered the consequences of her actions. She glanced back over her shoulder one more time, unable to resist looking at the scene she had just left behind. The guard was still standing tall, his posture as rigid and professional as ever. The horse, though much calmer now, was still alert, its ears flicking every so often as it scanned the crowd. The atmosphere around them had shifted. People were still admiring the royal guard and his horse, but there was now an unspoken respect in the air, a reminder that these horses were not mere statues or props for tourists to interact with. They were living beings with their own instincts and limits, and those limits had been tested today. Emily stopped walking for a moment and took a deep breath. The city was beautiful, and the palace in front of her was everything she had imagined it to be. But the excitement she had felt earlier had been replaced by something else: humility. She felt like she had learned a hard lesson, one that she would carry with her for a long time. The events of the past few minutes had taught her something far more valuable than any photograph ever could. She thought back to the moments leading up to the incident. When she had first seen the royal guard and his horse, she had been in awe of their beauty. The guard's uniform, the horse's powerful presence, and the historic setting had seemed like the perfect scene for a photograph. Emily had been so eager to capture that beauty, so focused on getting the perfect picture, that she had failed to recognize the significance of the situation. She had gotten too close, too comfortable, without considering the safety of the horse, the guard, or even herself. And that had nearly cost her. The lesson was clear. Respect for animals, especially those trained for specific purposes, was not something to take lightly. Animals, no matter how calm or well-trained, had their limits. They had instincts, just like humans, and when those instincts were triggered, the consequences could be unpredictable. The royal guard's horse, though majestic and seemingly calm, had been a reminder of that. It had shown Emily that her actions, no matter how well-intentioned, could have led to a situation far worse than just a frightened horse. As Emily continued to walk, her thoughts shifted to the guard. He had been calm throughout the entire ordeal. His silence had spoken volumes, and the way he had handled the situation with such quiet authority had impressed her. He hadn't shouted or reacted in anger. He had simply done his job with professionalism. The horse had responded to him, trusting him completely, as they had been trained to do. Emily had seen firsthand how much responsibility the guards had, not just for their own safety, but for the safety of everyone around them, including the public. She couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for the guard. He had been the one who had kept the situation from escalating further. It wasn't just his training that made him an excellent royal guard. It was his ability to remain calm and collected under pressure. Emily knew she could learn something from that. In her own life, she often found herself getting caught up in the excitement of the moment, rushing ahead without thinking things through. But now, she understood the importance of taking a step back, of being aware of her surroundings, and of respecting boundaries. As Emily moved further away from the palace, she decided to sit on a nearby bench. She needed a moment to collect her thoughts and let everything sink in. The city around her was as beautiful as ever, but everything felt different now. She felt different. The world seemed quieter, more thoughtful. The rush of excitement that had consumed her earlier was now replaced by a calm awareness. She had learned that moments of beauty, like the one she had witnessed with the royal guard and his horse, were not to be rushed. They were to be observed, respected, and appreciated from a distance. As she sat there, she reflected on the lesson she had learned. It wasn't just about approaching animals with caution. It was about understanding the space of others, whether it was a horse, a person, or a tradition. There were lines that shouldn't be crossed, and those lines were there for a reason. Sometimes, the best way to engage with something beautiful was to appreciate it from afar, to respect its boundaries and its purpose. Emily had been so focused on capturing that beauty that she had overlooked the most important thing: respect. She smiled softly to herself. Maybe this wasn't the trip she had imagined when she had first set out to explore the city. She had come here, looking for pictures, for stories to tell her friends back home. But instead, she had found something much more important. She had found a deeper understanding of the world around her, and of the people and animals who inhabited it. It wasn't the picture-perfect moments that mattered most. It was the moments that taught you something, that left you with a lesson you could carry with you forever. As Emily sat there, her camera resting beside her, she realized that this experience, this lesson, was one of the most valuable souvenirs she would take from her trip. It wasn't something she could capture in a photo or describe in a story. It was a feeling, a realization, that she would carry with her long after she returned home. The respect for traditions, for boundaries, and for the living creatures that shared the world with her was something that would stay with her, shaping the way she approached the world from then on. She stood up, took one last look at the palace, and then turned to leave. Her steps were lighter now, her heart calmer. She had learned her lesson. The next time she saw something beautiful, she would take the time to understand it, to appreciate it, and to respect the space it needed. She knew that was the way to truly capture the moment, not just through a camera lens, but through a deeper, more mindful connection. As Emily walked away, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She knew that no picture could ever capture the feeling she had right now. But that was okay. Sometimes, the most meaningful moments weren't meant to be photographed, they were meant to be lived.